Interesting. What inspired you to join the non-profit sector, Heather, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, that's interesting because I grew up in Utah, which is kind of a small place in the middle of the U.S. Never traveled east of the Mississippi, but loved my National Geographics and would
Yeah.
spend endless hours going through them. I collected maps, but I had never really gone anywhere, never left the country. And then, but that's what I wanted to do at university, even though I knew very little. You know, I see all these people who are prepping for universities and go on college tours and do all this. I didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
I went to my college counselor, I opened a book, I picked the 5 for international studies, I applied to them, and I went. And then it was actually the tsunami, I think. Well, it was a combination. First of all, I started my career, I got a research fellowship at Johns Hopkins to study the negative externalities of the one-child policy in China. Yes, which sounds very long and formal. But what that led me to was actually working in orphanages, because one of the negative externalities was obviously people were abandoning children because they couldn't have more than one, and predominantly girls, because if you're only allowed one child, then you know people would prefer a male child.
This is the early 2000s.
Yeah, so this would have been, I started in 2000 is the first time I went and kind of did some work in orphanages, and then 2001 and 2002 I spent some more time. And they were predominantly, the orphanages were filled predominantly with girls, young girls. And it was really interesting. So I think what was interesting is seeing just a few small things and information and other things could make such a big difference to so many. So that kind of made me think, you can do a lot for kids with very little, with just the right information and the right timing and really willing people. So it doesn't have to be a huge amount of money, and I still believe that now.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is I was still working in China. I was teaching economics and international baccalaureate school when the tsunami hit.
Yeah.
And so I went and I volunteered at some small NGO in Thailand.
This is 2004, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was really eye-opening. First of all, there were quite a few NGOs there, a bit chaotic, some doing good work, some not. So that was actually a really valuable lesson for me. And I think it, again, taught me that it's not a matter of money. There were donations, there were tons of money coming in, but not everything was reaching the people who really needed it. So it was so fascinating to kind of be there on the ground and see all this happening, and so many people who wanted to help, but needed a direction to do it the right way. So I absolutely was fascinated, and so I went back to get my master's degree specifically in management in humanitarian crises, and I specialized in post-conflict transitions. So thus Afghanistan and
Pakistan
places,
and many different places. Well, Timor, right? Timor as well, if I'm not mistaken.
East Timor.
How long were you there for?
Just a year, and it's a interesting place. Very small country. At the time, less than 1 million people.
Yeah.
65% of the population under 15, and the highest rate of smoking in the world.
In Timor?
Yeah, at the time, you'd see 11-year-old kids smoking everywhere. Yeah, it was really surprising. And it's where I met my husband, who's Portuguese. So I have very fond memories because, you know, it's always nice to meet your husband, and beautiful scuba diving. But it was an interesting place to meet because East Timor had also had, of course, a big conflict. And this was a decade afterwards. And it was really interesting to see a country in kind of that stage of its transition.
Let me quickly ask you this. It's one of the highest rates of smoking. Did Timor eliminate that? Have they reduced it by now? Let's just go back and just check this. And I just want to understand how they're tackling that, if they're tackling the reduction of fuel smoking. Smoking in East Timor is highly gone. No. Smokers, 33% of the population smoke daily. There's a reason why I'm getting into this. I'll share about that. Oh, wow. You were there for a whole year?
Yes.
So one of the things so I smoked cigarettes. I started when I was 15. I started when I was 15 or 16. That's generally how it works when one of your friend in school says, try garum na, let's give it a shot. And then you take your first puff, and then I was instantly addicted to it. Within a day or two, I needed it every single day. And I smoked cigarettes for a good amount of 15 years, and I quit. I realized that quitting was one of the hardest things that I've ever done in my life because I was so addicted to cigarettes for 15 years. It was my best friend, and letting go of your best friend is not easy at all. But now, after being smoke-free for almost 4.5 years, it's one of the best decisions I made in my life. Obviously, I still tell my friend with whom I smoked my first cigarette that, why did we start? Why did we go to that pool house, and why did you give me that cigarette? But obviously, I'm not blaming him. Casually go ahead and share that with him. But I should have never, ever. I still wish till today that I never started it. So it starts from when you're young with a lot of kids. And it's something that I've constantly been telling the government that we need to come out with at least some kind of policy where we reduce somehow we try to figure out we reduce the access to kids kids to get access to cigarettes. And can we work on something similar, something along this line, or are we working towards something along this line to make sure that kids don't get access to cigarettes somehow?
I mean, we should. Save the
Let's do
Children
it.
doesn't have an active campaign in Nepal right now, but I mean, it's really an interesting subject because I think the Western world has done a huge amount to reduce the amount of smoking, mostly through making cigarettes really expensive. And also less accessible. And you can still go to any corner shop and buy a cigarette one at a time, which is actually shown to have a direct correlation on like how easily it is to access a cigarette. Especially if you say, oh, I'm going to quit, I'm not going to buy another pack, maybe just one more, right? So, but it's also very tricky because a lot of the campaigns, whether it's against smoking, against drinking, against drug use, have been shown to be utterly ineffective. So I think there was... what was it? In the U.S., they had all these campaigns and actually showed to slightly increase marijuana use or increase smoking because then kids saw this as something kind of cool that older people didn't want you to do. So then they were curious. So I think it's really important when we design any campaign is to make sure we're designing it in a way that helps people understand the consequences as opposed to makes people a bit curious, not has any negative implications. So I'm a big fan of kind of behavior change sciences because you can't just tell someone, no, we're complex people, right? If you say don't do something, well, think about us. We all know that, eating certain foods is harmful for our health, but man, I'm not going to pass up on a chocolate cake, right?
No doubt.
So I think it's really important to really look and say, what is something we can do? And the best thing to do is actually talk to the youth themselves. What works and what doesn't? Why are people smoking? What makes it fascinating? Because the truth is cigarettes don't really taste good. It's not like candy, right? But people smoke every day. Even for me, I didn't smoke as a child, but when I was in the humanitarian sector, especially at post-emergencies, everyone is smoking. And I kind of thought, well, I feel a bit out of place being the only one who isn't. Plus, you're sitting in a cloud of cigarette smoke. You think, might as well have one or two. But it's very easy then that one or two can very easily become one or two a week, one or two a day. And so it was really important for me to say, well, am I really a social smoker or is this turning into a habit? And so then I said, look, it can't be an occasional thing. It has to be a full stop.
Yeah. Maybe Red Alert Network can work on something, and maybe we all can work on something, and the next generation or the generation after that will not get access to cigarettes here when they're young.
Well, I think it's tricky, too, because when we talk air pollution, when we talk smoking, you can't see the effect it's having inside, right? I think one of the most effective things is when they show those pictures of what people's lungs really look like, and it's not very nice, but it's very difficult to really understand what you're doing to your own body, whether it's living in a polluted city or smoking a cigarette, et cetera. So I think whether it's SAFI, whether it's some of these other campaigns that show like this is what your lungs look like after so much exposure, I think helping people realize that and see it right in front of them makes a big difference.